Welcome to Management TV. Today we're going to be in a conversation with James Cameron. You can think of James Cameron as the ultimate crossover artist. He's a scientist, he's a filmmaker, and I would say he is the ultimate marketeer. He has done films like Terminator, Titanic, and recently Avatar that not only have changed the industry, but achieved record high sales. We're going to explore with him today creativity, marketing, business, and life. Thank you very much, James, for being with me today.
Thanks, Eduardo. Thanks for having me on the show.
Jeff Katzenberg, the head of DreamWorks, once said that there were two big revolutions in the film industry. One was sound, the other one was color. And now there is a third revolution, and that is 3D and Avatar.
Yeah, Jeffrey and I are in agreement on that. We both think that this is a major sea change in the way media is watched and therefore consumed. And you know, I've been working on, my first 3D project was 15 years ago, and I started a company to develop cameras with an engineering partner, Vince Pace, 10 years ago. We started developing camera systems. So we were ahead of the curve of thinking that this would actually be a wave sweeping through cinema. We were just experimenting with the systems to see what was possible. Within a couple of years, it became apparent that this could be the new form of cinema that could really take root and possibly even supplant you know, the 2D cinema that we had known our whole lives. And so, you know, that we got a lot of increased momentum during the mid part of this decade, and in the last few years it's really come to fruition that people are accepting 3D, that it's a different type of 3D than they've seen before, much better, clearer, brighter, more reliable technically, and so on. And the way it's being integrated into filmmaking is more organic. It's not the sort of gimmicky form that we experienced periodically from the 50s on through you know, until this new wave, if you will, or renaissance.
Let's go back to the idea of Avatar. How did you come up with the idea?
Well, that goes back again to right before I was shooting Titanic, which was about 15 years ago. And just coincidentally, because I did my first 3D project 15 years ago as well. But I hadn't put the pieces together yet. I hadn't thought of Avatar as a 3D movie. I just thought of it as a movie that we would make. And I wrote a storyline about another planet and you know, the people that live there, their language, their culture, all that sort of thing. And my idea for it was to, first of all, do something very visually dramatic, but secondly, to push the art of CG, facial animation, and performance capture. I had this idea that we could capture actors, we could take their performances, transfer them onto CG characters, which hadn't been done. We'd done body capture, and we did it on Titanic for all the big crowds of people and so on, but we hadn't really done facial performance at that point. And it turned out I was a little ahead of the curve, too far ahead of the curve. And I think this is an important thing about, you can have these creative impulses, but sometimes you also have to bow to practicality. And the practicality was, it was too many steps of development before we could do that in '95, so I shelved the project, as I knew that there were going to be so many advancements made by so many different filmmakers across the board. And you know, I was CEO of a major visual effects company at the time, so we were pushing, and I figured there would be a time to pick it back up, and it was a question of hitting the right timing.
You're focusing on the technology aspect. What about the story?
Well,
how important and relevant is the story in its success?
Well, interestingly, you know, I had always wanted to do, you know, a kind of wild science fiction story that took place on another planet, completely made up, but I had never written it. And the proximal cause of me sitting down to write it was, as the CEO of an effects company, wanting to raise the bar technologically. But then, of course, the actual writing has to make sense from a purely creative standpoint. So I took that hat off, you know, my business hat, and I put on my creative kind of writer-director hat. Yeah, exactly. And I started thinking of all the images that came to mind were all images from, you know, my childhood, from every science fiction book I ever read, from my personal time spent in the forest. This was in Canada, not in a rainforest, but the principle of being connected to nature and so on still applied, and that drove, you know, the themes of the story. And also my very real concerns, both in my teenage years and throughout my adulthood, about the environment. Okay. You know, so I tried to weave in the environmental messaging in such a way that it didn't dominate the story in a way that people might find off-putting, but that you were left at the end of the story with this strong sense of maybe almost a sense of outrage about what's happening to nature. Without any finger pointing. I'm not pointing at specific people or specific industries or so on, but just creating a sense that we have to do something as human beings. And that was an important part of the creative process for me on that film.
I believe you're an incredible marketeer. And
well, thanks.
Yeah, you know why? Well, because you've created 3 very different movies that were so well received. And when I think that you started with this project 10, 15 years ago, I'm even more impressed. Because how do you do to select the right balance of experience and story, being it on a love film like the Titanic to Avatar? How do you sense it? What the market will buy?
You know, well, I think, first of all, I think, you know, certainly Titanic and Avatar have a timelessness about them. And I believe that they could be released in different markets over time because they deal with core human values, things that are universal to all cultures around the world. Titanic, it's love, a sense of loss, a sense of duty, the people that stayed versus the people that went in the lifeboats and so on. These are things that I think resonate with people around the world. Avatar, it was about our relationship with nature and with each other, how we see each other, you know, whether we respect each other or not. And so these are ideas that travel well throughout different cultures. They're also meant to be strongly visual ideas and very emotional films. So I think in order to have a successful kind of formula, if you will, and I don't like the term formula, but I think you do have to be somewhat analytical about what you're putting into a film. You know, you need to hit the emotional buttons of the audience somehow. You've got to involve them. You've got to take them on an emotional journey. You've got to take them on a visual journey to something they've never seen before. I think that's really important. That's something that cinema can do. And you have to be able to resolve the story in a way that's somewhat challenging to the audience, but also satisfying. And that's a very fine balance to hit.
Would that be lessons for the business world? Do you apply those lessons when you handle a project in the technology sector?
Well, I think, you know, you have to think about your market. You know, who am I selling to? You know, and how are they going to respond to it? How does this look new, and how does it look recognizable enough that I understand what it is that I'm getting? So I think the basic principles apply. You know, my business knowledge pretty much ends at media, at movies and television and that sort of thing. But I think the basic principles would apply. And of course, the basic principles of marketing apply to how you sell a movie to a global audience. And if you think about Avatar, we had to create a brand from scratch, virtually overnight, before the film was opened. It wasn't based on a novel, or it wasn't based on another movie or a TV series or anything. It was a brand new idea, and Avatar itself was outside of you know, Hindu culture, pretty much you know, an unknown word in terms of any brand association. So we had to create all that in a big drum roll up to the moment of release, or the film wouldn't have opened.